Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel IBD with me, Maddie. If you're new here, my name is Maddie and I have IBD. Now, if you've been following along, we've covered my early diagnosis, my medications, and some of my worst flare-ups. But today, I wanted to tackle a chapter that was completely life transforming for me, and that's my surgical journey. So, between the ages of 19 and 22, I had 6 different operations. So, today I want to share how I got through each of those. The things that nobody tells you about having emergency surgery, navigating very complex and difficult relationships through intense medical trauma, and how I went from being absolutely terrified of having a stoma to living full-time with a permanent one. So by the time I was 19 years old, I had exhausted all my medical options. My Crohn's disease was just severe and aggressive, and the consultants advised me that really the only way to give my gut a break was to have surgery. So I had my operation booked at my main hospital, and then unfortunately, due to cancellations and being bumped due to emergencies, I ended up having to go to another hospital in a different city to have my operation, and that ended up being October of 2012. So, being so many miles away from my regular hospital and then being isolated from my family and friends, that was terrifying. And I was facing this life-changing operation completely alone, essentially. Yeah. There was always a chance that I might not have needed the stoma. The surgeon was aware of how young I was, and she said to me that she would try her absolute best to try and save me from having to have a stoma at such a young age. So I do remember that as soon as I was consciously awake from the anesthetic, the first thing I did was put my hand down on my stomach, and I felt that bag, that rustle and that crinkle and scrunch. Yeah, and I knew then that I had the stoma. And one of the first things I was advised by the stoma nurse was to try and give it a name. Usually a name that would begin with S. So for me at the time, I was watching a lot of episodes of Family Guy, and Stewie Griffin is quite little and evil. And to me, at that moment in time, that stoma was little and evil. And Stewie's name began with an S, so I decided to call my stoma Stewie. And it does come in a little bit helpful when I'm out in public. If I am having maybe a bit of an issue with maybe leakage, I can sort of subtly say to maybe my mum who's with me, oh, I think I need to go nip into a bathroom because I'm having a bit of an issue with Stewie. Nobody else around knows what we're talking about, but we do. There was a lot to learn with having a stoma at 19. It was a very steep learning curve. Learning how to empty the bag by myself, that was quite challenging. I fainted in the shower the very first time I washed by myself. And then reintroducing solid foods again and drinks, you know, having to completely rethink everything. Having said that, one of the things I did consume a couple of days after surgery was a Subway. Mainly because I wanted to see what would happen with my new stoma, because I was told that fizzy drinks could react differently, the gas and the bubbles. And, you know, a 6-inch Subway sandwich is quite a solid thing to eat. So this was probably about 4 days after surgery. No, the hospital didn't know I was eating that. I got somebody to smuggle it in for me. I was fine, by the way. Turns out nothing bad actually happened to me. Thankfully, the Fanta that I had was fine. And the sandwich I ate was fine as well. I didn't get any issues with stomach pain or bloating or any uncomfortable issues with the stoma. But just because I did that, I wouldn't advocate anybody else doing that. That was just me wanting to see what would happen. But I wouldn't advocate doing that just because you've been given the go ahead to reintroduce solid foods and things like that. Maybe hold off from that type of food and beverage. So despite those couple of hiccups and bumps, I was actually only in hospital. So from the night of admission, day of admission, to day of discharge, it was literally, I showed up on the Monday, and then on the Friday, the stoma nurses, they just wanted me to be 100% sure before they sent me home. So they said, we're going to just leave you over the weekend here, just give you another 2 days to get yourselves familiar, you know, into a routine. And then on Monday, if everything's still good, then we'll let you away home. So yeah, I was literally only in from Monday to Monday after having such a big procedure. That's pretty impressive. So I did recover and heal quite well physically, but mentally, being 19 years old and having a stoma, that was tough. And it didn't help that I was in a relationship at the time with somebody who really didn't accept my stoma. And so that meant I fell under immense pressure to look and feel what they considered normal. And that would include doing things like showering and changing my stoma bag twice a day, every day, and using medical tape to actually tape around the stoma bag, to tape it to my skin, to try and minimize the chance of a leakage touching him. If a leakage is going to happen, it doesn't matter what material you've got on, it will go through all of it. But yes, because of that type of pressure, I really wanted to have the stoma reversed. And so, against medical advice, because the surgeons and the consultants, they knew that my Crohn's disease was still really high risk. They knew it was still a very unstable disease that I had. But I kept pushing and pushing. And so eventually, January 2014, I got my wish, and they reversed the stoma. So looking back, that reversal, that was driven more by wanting to please somebody else rather than what my body actually needed. And sure enough, by March 2014, so 3 months, the disease came back with a vengeance. So the doctors and the surgeons were right. I shouldn't have had it reversed. But things were about to get a lot worse. So, due to how that relationship was at the time, I felt that if I had told the hospital all of the symptoms I was experiencing, the first thing they would do would be to put my stoma back. And I knew that the person I was with at the time would likely break up with me. And it sounds silly now to say it out loud that, you know, now I'd be like, well, that's fine. Let them, off they go. Then they're not worth my time then. But back then at that age, I was in love and I wanted to please that person. So I hid how sick I was for months. I didn't tell the hospital. I was working 5 days a week in Asda. I was attempting to attend college 3 days a week. I was running a household and living in a very unsupportive, unhealthy, hostile environment. And so by August of 2014, I was severely malnourished. I was rapidly losing weight and I was passing blood constantly. So I think at one point, bearing in mind I'm 4'11", I think I weighed just between being on the border of 6 stone and then in the 5 stone category. I mean, I was very skeletal. So that same month, August of 2014, I went into hospital and had surgery number 3 to have the stoma put back. Now, unfortunately, because my body was so run down, 2 days after that surgery, I was rushed back to theatre because I needed to have another operation to clear out an infection in my pelvis. And that then led to 5 weeks being in hospital, during which time I had a pulmonary embolism in my lung. I had to have numerous drains put in for all the infectious fluid that was within my body. I was on copious amounts of different antibiotics, which were making me feel awful. And then once I finally did get discharged from the hospital, I had to go to the GP every day, and then the local hospital on the weekends to have an open pelvic wound cleared out and repacked and dressed. For months I had to do that. And it was tough, but I was hanging in there. I kept going. It was difficult, but yes, I kept doing it. So I had gone into hospital in the August and I didn't come out until September. And then my next clinic review appointment wasn't till the December of 2014, so a couple of months later. And in that time, I was back meeting up with my friends again and hanging out, and I was still dealing with that toxic relationship issue. But I was still trying to live life normally. And at the clinic appointment, I remember just explaining how I'd been feeling, and my symptoms were that I'd been sweating a lot at night, like having really high temperatures at night time, but I would be feeling quite cold myself. My stomach would get really full really quickly after eating not very much. And then I'd be really bloated and have really bad pain. And it would just come and go. But mostly it would be after eating. And I just thought it was healing from the surgery. I didn't really think, oh, it could be septic abscesses or my aggressive Crohn's disease. So the consultant asked if he could have a feel of my abdomen. And when he did, he said he could feel 2 masses. And he said they felt very hard. And he'd asked, had you been feeling quite tired? And I was like, well, yeah. But again, I thought all this sort of lethargy and things were from the surgery I'd had back in the August and the September, And so I was admitted to hospital immediately, and I was started on a TPN feed. So that was intravenous. I got a PICC line put in because my veins were just not up to standard, and because the type of feeding tubes and things that were required, it needed to be a specific vein. So I had a PICC line put in and the TPN feeds, because my body was just way too weak at that time to be able to go through a surgery of that importance. And whilst I was on the ward, this was December, festive time. There was 2 older ladies in the bay, and they were really, really nice. And they gave me some words of wisdom. And I ended that toxic, horrible relationship for good from my hospital bed. I made it clear that things were over. So I got rid of that negative input. That dynamic was gone. And then I got my date for surgery. And it was going to be the 24th of December, Christmas Eve. So because I was going to be missing out on Christmas Day, I got given a day pass. I think it was about the 21st of December. So I got to go home, and I spent the day with my family, and we had our own Christmas Day that day. So we opened our presents, we had turkey dinner, we watched the usual rubbish TV, and just spent time together. And then just before I went back to the hospital, I made a little stop at my friend's grave just to say hello. And then that was me. I was waiting to head to surgery on Christmas Eve to have these 2 septic abscesses taken out, cleared, removed, and any other parts of the active disease were also going to be taken out and removed. So that was what I had consented for, and that's what my understanding of the procedure was. And it was a long operation, 9.5 hours. So I got called down to surgery at 8 a.m. By the time you do all the final checks and things, probably didn't actually go into theatre until about 9 a.m. And then I'm told it was 9.5 hours of surgery and then a few hours of recovery afterwards before then being transported to the high dependency unit. Recovery in the HDU, that was quite tough. The hospital staff did dress up as Santa Claus and elves, and they did actually hand out little presents of like little hand creams. I wasn't really conscious for any of this. This is just what I've been told. And they did make it as festive a place as it could be. And then I moved on to the ward for recovery. That was quite brutal. But the biggest shock I got was when I found out just how much the surgeons had to intervene. So I remember I had a lot of pain in the back passage area, and I was aware that there was a dressing there, and I remember thinking that was a bit strange because every other surgery I had had up to that point had the stereotypical pelvic laceration, and then all the other keyhole incisions. So I was a bit confused why there was so much pain and discomfort down there, and why there was dressings and things down there. So I remember once I was up and moving, my mum was helping me to the bathroom. I remember asking her, could she just have a look? And I was like, what do you see? And she was like, nothing, it's all just healing up nicely. And I was like, yeah, but what's healing up? You know, I was like, I don't understand. There'd never been an incision down there, so what do you mean? And she was like, well, the stitches, the blue stitches. And I was like, what stitches? I don't understand. And she was like, well, there's nothing there, it's all just stitched up. So I was a bit concerned and a bit shocked when she said that there was nothing there. So it was then explained to me that during the surgery, the surgeons had gone in and they had done what they needed to remove the septic abscesses and clear out all the infection and all of that damage. And then they went in and had to remove the sections of Crohn's disease that was severely aggressive and damaged. And there was a lot more damage than they thought, but also they could see the way that it was spreading, and they knew that if they were to just stick to doing what was there at the time and then stitch me up, they could then maybe go back in and do what was called a total proctocolectomy 5-6 months down the line the following year. But their concern at the time was I wasn't really healthy enough to even be having that procedure, never mind recovering, and if I was to have another flare up in that time before they can get to that surgery to take the rest out. So rather than stop the surgery, rather than wake me up, the surgeons went ahead and removed what is medically termed a total proctocolectomy. So that is where the back passage is completely removed. So that was a bit of a shock. That definitely took a minute to get my head around. But you know what? I kept going with my recovery, and incredibly, so the operation was on Christmas Eve, and incredibly, I convinced the doctors that I had genuinely made enough of a recovery, which I genuinely had, to let me go home properly to be discharged, which I was, by 8 p.m. on New Year's Eve. And I didn't tell my mum. It was actually my dad and my brother were in visiting me. They were just in to visit me for New Year's Eve, to spend some time with me. And I just made a cheeky, offhanded comment that what was the chances with it being New Year's Eve of letting me get home, because I was pretty much okay, really, to go. And he was like, you know what, okay, fair enough, yeah. And yeah, just walking back through the door and my mum being so confused to be like, but what are you doing here? But to be able to explain, no, I was actually properly discharged. I'm actually okay. I'm good. You know, it was a really special feeling to be able to be a part of that, to see everybody's face and just to be with my family like a week after something so intense as that. Now, I don't know if anybody else has been in a similar position, but because I'd had that pulmonary embolism in my lung after the August surgeries, they were really concerned about another one happening after what was going to be such a long operation. So I had two choices. I could have these sort of massage cuffs that would inflate and deflate, you know, automatically on this pump. Or I could have, I think it's what's called a bird cage fitted, where essentially it's like a metal kind of claw that would just sort of sit, and it would be designed to sit in one of the arteries, and just, if there was a clot coming up, it would catch it in that claw, and they could then remove that at a later date. But the thought of having another additional procedure before this Christmas Eve procedure, and I'd already had to have the procedures for the PICC line, and you know, I was aware of how unwell I was, and then there was all these, you know, pros and cons. You know, they have to tell you all the potential risks, of course, but it was just too many for me. I didn't feel comfortable. I was too scared. I liked the idea of it, but I was just too scared to go through with it. And the inflatable cuffs, they worked fine for me. They definitely were very helpful. So after the new year, I kept recovering, kept getting better. I even managed a little trip out to Australia to see family. Unfortunately, I was only there for, I think, 10 or 11 days before I had to come back to the UK because of a really unfortunate family tragedy. But by July 2015, so 7 months since the Christmas Eve total proctocolectomy, I did need to have another small procedure, another small operation. So operation number 6 was basically the skin was not supporting the stoma where it should be, and it had formed a bit of a dip, and so my bags weren't able to seal properly onto where they should sit, and I was getting a lot of leakage. So I had a day operation just to have it refashioned, and then I was in for a couple of days afterwards just for an infection, just to help get on top of that with some antibiotics. But that was, to date, touch wood, that was the last time I've had an operation. So it took 6 different operations, clearing out of toxic relationships, but having the stoma, it has given me my health and my life back. Thank you so much for watching such a personal chapter in my journey. And if you found this video useful, then please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and feel free to drop a comment. As always, take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.